Hey, what's up guys? Today we're talking about TICKS, the 93 creature feature classic. This recently got a Vinegar Syndrome 4K ridiculous collector's edition, which is very well deserved in my opinion. This is a movie that I remember from video stores when I was a kid, but you know, at the time I was a super cool, edgy preteen. I couldn't be bothered with paying attention to something with a cover like this. I was watching Hellraiser and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's a real shame because this movie is pretty much a favorite. I just recently saw it in the last couple years and it became an instant favorite. It's everything I want in a 90s horror movie. I love 90s horror, and I think it's very underrated, and this is a perfect example of why I like it. First off, it's got a ridiculous cast. Seth Green, pre-stoner Seth Green, with the most relatable 90s haircut you've ever seen. It looks like his mom just put a bowl on his head, cut around it, and then it grew out for a year. That's the haircut every boy in the 90s was rocking. You've also got Amy Dolenz, Clint Howard, and most prominently, Alfonso Ribeiro, who you probably know as Carlton Banks from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, playing extremely against type as a cool, tough street kid. Super hilarious, super awesome. By the way, his name is Panic. He has one of the funniest introductions I've ever seen in a movie.
See, they call me Panic because I never do.
And yeah, the most interesting thing about this movie, as if I didn't love it for what it was, is the story behind it. And basically, the story is the special effects guy on here, Doug Bestwick. He was a stop motion animator in the 80s. He grew up on all the 50s atomic scare monster movies, and so he wrote his own, and he basically kept it in his back pocket and showed it to anybody who would listen, and he constantly tightened it up and updated it for 10 years until he finally met somebody who actually was into making it 10 years later, and that guy ended up getting Brian Usna on board, who is one of the best horror producers ever, which is saying a lot because usually a producer credit doesn't mean much, but in the 80s and 90s, if Brian Usna was involved, it was usually pretty awesome stuff, especially on the effects side and how far they went with the concept. They got Tony Randall to direct, an awesome cast, and Doug Bestwick got to do about 90% of the effects on it. So it was just a best case scenario kind of thing, and magic happened. And so just that kind of history behind the movie adds that much more to it. And you can really tell with how tight the story is that this Doug Bestwick guy got a chance to really tighten it up over those 10 years. The whole movie, you can just tell they're having fun making it. The effects in it are top tier. I mean, all through the movie, all of the little ticks are some stop motion, some just really well designed, and there are loads of them. They use a lot of miniatures, and that all leads up to the biggest special effect in the movie, which was done by K&B, which is the giant final boss tick. Probably one of the better special effects of the 90s. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Basically, a giant tick busts out of Panic's body, and it is a pretty impressive scene. And speaking of which, I mean, poor Panic. That guy goes through the worst time in this movie. Going into the third act, his dog gets killed by a tick. He runs away, runs into evil weed growers who beat the shit out of him and end up shooting him, which actually leads to one of the funniest falls I've ever seen in a movie. And in that moment, for some reason, he decides to eat steroids that he had stolen earlier, which leads to the tick that bit him earlier and crawled up inside of him to mutate into the giant boss tick at the end. He kind of crawls into the cabin and dies, and then After a few minutes, his body starts flying around the room like it's possessed. The tick busts out of his head splits open, the limbs are coming out of his arms and legs. It's insane. Definitely worth checking out, just for that scene alone, really. But the whole movie's entertaining. The whole tick lore is pretty cool. I mean, as a guy who grew up in the sticks, I can say that ticks will pop if you burn them. They won't exactly explode like a hand grenade like they do in this movie, but I mean, the logic is there. If they're 100 times bigger than a normal tick, then it makes sense that the explosion might be, at least in this sci-fi movie setting. So that's pretty good stuff. Clint Howard gives a great performance in here, as always. He's kind of the backwoods weed grower who creates the chemical that mutates the ticks. He ends up getting infested and has a really cool scene with some great makeup. And yeah, I mean, it's just kind of about as good as 90s horror gets. Honestly, my rating is a 10 out of 10. I know not everybody's going to agree with that, but this movie is just so perfect for me. It's everything I want. It's got a nostalgic cast. It's got a great story, a simple story, and a ridiculous ending that I'll never forget. I can throw this movie on any time of the day. Anybody who hasn't seen it, especially if you love 90s horror and you're nostalgic for the 90s and stuff, definitely check it out. It's worth it for Alfonso Ribeiro's performance alone, the special effects, and for at least seeing a little baby Seth Green running around with a shaggy ass bowl cut. It's great stuff. But yeah, that's it. Let me know in the comments if you love this movie as much as I do or not. Either way, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and until next time.